And I both, probably even more so her, have just been so emotional, it seemed like, in the last few months. And, um, and even through this, I would like to have been at the house when you all brought that basket of goodies from the church and just to see how she responded. But when we came home from the hospital yesterday, all the grandchildren had colored pictures and written notes for Wendy, and they were told not to hug grandma. And so when we first came in, even with Levi might be out of all of the six, the most active out of all of the six grandchildren. And little Levi even, it really blessed my heart. As soon as we came in, saw those pictures, Wendy and I both just started to cry, and just the emotion. And I got a blessing out of Levi. He was downstairs or somewhere playing, and the other kids were there, and none of them wanted to hug, but because they were expressed, mentioned not to. But Wendy wanted to hug them all, so she reached out, and so they all were moving in real slow. And then when Levi came up, Levi, grandma's back, and so he comes up, and Wendy reached out to hug him. And as active as he can be, he just stopped almost with fear in his eyes, and he didn't shake his head no, but I mean, he's just right on the edge. I could just see he's probably thinking, no, I'm not doing that. So that little guy's obedience and love toward his grandmother, kind of got to me a little bit. And so I love my grandchildren, love all of you. And boy, it's been a trying few months. Everything I mentioned the other night with hurting. When you're hurt, you're just emotionally, you're just more sensitive when you're hurt. And so Wendy is so appreciative. I'm sure with her mentioning she was overwhelmed, that is just being overwhelmed with your love. And we have been moved to tears because of it. So anyway, I want to make sure and say thank you again. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And I've titled the lessons here tonight, You Can't Saw Sawdust. You can't saw sawdust. And which gives away one of my illustrations a little bit later on if you put the title together with it. And sorry about that. But you can't saw sawdust. First Corinthians chapter 15. I'm going to give you some more lessons on worrying. It seemed like we just continue to re-emphasize some of these truths that we already are aware of or that we know but need to be reminded of. Really, when you think about it, there's nothing new under the sun, and we come to church every week, every service, to be reminded. Those of you that have been Christians for some time, you just come in here to be reminded of the truth that you pretty much so know already. And it's just good to know that how God's timing is always so amazing, that he just seems to put something on the preacher's heart. And I'm not just saying for me, but it's always so fulfilling when I preach something and find out that's exactly what our church needed or what somebody needed. That is always so fulfilling. So we just need these truths. I need these truths, but that's a little bit of a preface. I know that we seem to be hammering this same truth especially when it comes to worry, and that is worrying about those unborn futures and the dead past, and all the lessons. So many things that I've been learning. I don't know how many times when I'm in my office and I'll turn my little hourglass over. Joe and Dar bought me an hourglass a few weeks ago, and it's an hour. I don't know. They probably make big hourglasses, I'm sure, that are 24 hours, maybe. I don't know. I'd have to study that one to see. But this one's an hour, and I'm constantly flipping that thing. And I've even timed it with my timer to see if it's actually an hour, and it's within a few seconds of actually being an hour. And so I enjoy all these little lessons that we've learned. And last week, basically, you got to put a stop loss eventually. You got to come to the point where you have to say, how much I'm going to allow this worrying to take advantage of me and take so much life out of me. And so all these little lessons. So once again tonight, it won't be anything new, but maybe something you just need to be reminded of again tonight. So 1 Corinthians chapter 15, we'll start in verse 9. And before we read, let's pray together. Lord, thank you for the Word of God. Thank you that we can take these little simple truths, although not all completely biblical truths of this study on worry, but yet apply biblical truths to what I've been reading and then apply it to our life spiritually. So I pray that once again tonight that you will guide in the lesson and these truths, and we'll thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. 1 Corinthians 15, and Paul said in verse 9, he says, "For I am the least of the apostles, then am not meet to be called an apostle." And he gives his heart here, "because I persecuted the church of God." And so the things that he said I have in my life that I'm able to participate in, there's no reason why I should be able to do so, because I persecuted the church of God. He didn't forget his past. And he goes on, he says, "But by the grace of God, I am what I am. And his grace, which was bestowed upon me, was not in vain." Now look at this next statement. "But I labored more abundantly than they all. Yet not I, but the grace of God, which was with me." I like that. That's the thoughts that I keep saying I've been reading this book, and it's not a spiritual, not a sacred book, but I'm enjoying taking a book that was actually written back in the 20s and the 30s, 1920s and 30s, and applying spiritual truths to it. And I thought of this portion of Scripture with some of the lessons that I'm going to give tonight. So many times we worry about the mistakes that we have made and that we've made in the past. You're sitting right here in church now, and so hopefully for the next 30, 40 minutes, with us being here in church, we all ought to be in decent shape as far as doing something dumb, something silly that we'd have regrets about. I mean, we're in the house of God with the Word of God in our hands, and listening to the pastor, and in a wonderful environment. So chances are the next few minutes is we should be in pretty good shape without doing something real dumb. And now I'm more risk at that than the rest of you, because being the more you say, the more you have to be accountable for it, obviously. But always pray and ask the Lord to help me not to do that. But boy, we worry about things that we have done in the past, and we let it get the best of us, and we fret over things that we wish we would have done differently. I'm at the age now where, quite a few things I wish I'd have done differently, words you wish you could have taken back, and being in the pastorate, I learned in West Virginia. When I came here, I came a little bit more of an experienced pastor. I learned back then there's some battles that just weren't worth fighting that I chose to fight. And now I look back at it, I wished I wouldn't have chosen to have fought some of those battles. Some battles now, even other church members feel like I ought to fight some battles, and I, as pastor, feel like, no, I just don't know that for the overall outcome that that's a battle that's worth fighting. And hopefully that's God's leading to give discernment in those areas. That's always a tough one to know, when to fight, when not to fight. But sometimes we fret over things that we wish we'd have done differently. I have those messages I wished I wouldn't have preached, or would have preached maybe a little bit differently. And so we worry about things. We fret over things. We fret about things already been done. You ever wake up having a nightmare about a test that you were, being in school, and you had to take a test that you weren't ready for? I don't have those as often now, but boy, after college, not long after college, I'd wake up and be fretting over, this dream of thinking, oh no, I got to take a test and I'm not ready for this test. Those were nightmare dreams to me. I didn't like those kind of dreams. But you ever turn a paper in and then fret over it after you turned it in? The reality of it is it's too late, to fret over it. It doesn't matter how much fretting you do over that test you already turned in, or that you just turned over and said, oh boy, I've done all I could do, and that's it. Here it is, teacher. But boy, we go home and we fret over those things that are already done. That's our human nature. And the illustration was given that they went into the classroom, and one lesson the Dale Carnegie said he always that had remembered through much of his life. He said he went into the classroom and the teacher had a bottle of milk sitting on the desk, and it was in the lab area, and because they had a sink and all in the classroom, and so he said the teacher had a bottle of milk that was sitting on the desk. And of course, everybody wondering why the bottled milk was there. And so as he started the class, he took the bottle of milk and slid it over into the sink. And of course, he had it planned in such a way to where when it hit the sink that it would shatter. And so he said that when he scooted the bottle of milk over into the sink and it all shattered, then the teacher shouted, "The lesson for today is don't cry over spilt milk. Don't cry over spilt milk." Well, we've heard that term. Maybe all of us are a little bit older have heard that term. Some of you young kids are saying, that's the first time I've ever heard that. But a little quote, a little statement, don't cry over spilled milk. He said the teacher had him come up and look in the sink at the bottle that had been shattered and the milk. And he said, I want all of you to look into the sink. He said, I want to remind you, first of all, that the milk is gone. All of the milk that was in that bottle is gone. It's down the drain. You aren't going to get it back. You aren't going to get it back. And he said, now, with a little bit of prevention, the milk could have been saved with a little bit of prevention. But it's too late now. It's too late now. And boy, sometimes these little lessons that we have to accept are very difficult to accept. Quite a few lessons ago, I remember saying there are just some things that we will go through in our lives that really are tragic situations and that we aren't going to change. But one of the best steps for us is to have that ability to accept it, even when it is the worst, and accept that worst and make a decision from the position that we are in and the worst position that we can imagine being in, and learn our lessons from it. But sometimes it helps us when we come to the point that, you know what, I'm not going to get that milk back. It's already gone down the drain. There's nothing I can do to get it back. Now, there is some prevention that I maybe could have used to keep it from happening. And then the teacher said, he said, the next lesson I want you to learn about this spilled milk is, he said, you're going to have to write it off and you're going to have to forget about it. You're going to have to write it off and you're going to have to forget about it. You're not going to get any of it back and you're going to have to forget about it. Well, I have to admit, when I'm reading that and I'm thinking from a Christian perspective, that troubles me just a little bit. And so I've given some lessons that I hope to kind of soften that blow a little bit. I think there's truth, well, we know that there is truth to that. But I think that's why I wanted to go to Paul, and I started thinking about, but how did Paul deal with life? Paul had some things in his life. He persecuted Christians. I wonder if he ever had any regrets. We know that he didn't just forget it. I mean, we do know that Paul did say, I mean, there are these principles that we need to live by and that we've heard mentioned quite a few different times. And that is to press towards that mark, forgetting those things which are behind. And so we know that Paul understood this truth. But I'm not so sure that we need to grab a hold of that truth. And there's that fine line of, but you see, there's going to be some things that you'll never forget. Some things that you can't just wipe out of your mind. It is not possible. The scars that were created. I thought about it this evening. I went through this. I actually have a scar right here that's about 4 or 5 inches long. It's one of those that my wrist wasn't cut real deep, but when I fell back in October, somehow when I sliding up and down my ladder the way I was, I had a small cut that was just almost like a surface cut, but that crazy thing hurt like crazy, and I'm a little bit concerned because it goes right across my wrist, and it looks like maybe I needed some psychological help at some time in my life, and so I really am very conscious of it, and so it's maybe an inch and a half. The more I tell this story, it might be a foot long before this story is over, but about an inch and a half long here on my wrist, and so ever so often I got a new watch band for Christmas, and it'll slide up and down my wrist, and it'll catch that. And this afternoon that happened, and where my watch will come undone, and I'll have to redo it, and then I'll be oh yeah. You know what? It doesn't matter what I do. That scar is going to continue to be there. I can't just forget it. Some things you just aren't going to forget. I probably shouldn't remind some of you because you wouldn't even notice it, but one I'm very conscious of that I see every morning, have a scar right there above my chin. And I still remember when I did it. We were in evangelism, and we'd gone to the hospital, I think, for 2 or 3 weeks in a row. And I think one week Autumn was swinging Hannah's feet while she was hanging onto the bumper of the truck, and they were just having all kinds of fun. And then Hannah's hand slipped off the back bumper, and so while Autumn's holding her feet, and so Hannah face plants into the ground, and so that was a hospital visit. And then I think it wasn't long after that, Joshua ran through the front door of the house, and the glass broke, and he sliced his hand or something. So we're at the hospital again. And so then I was working on the fifth wheel trailer, and I remember I was putting a new toggle switch in, and the little area I was putting it in, the new toggle switch that I bought, I probably had maybe a 1/16 of an inch more if I would just maybe gotten a file or re-drilled it, but I'm thinking, oh man, it'll come. It can come through there. I know I can get it. And so I had a pair of pliers, and I had that toggle switch coming from the back, and I said, well, it's just about there. And I'm looking at it real close, and so I put the pliers on that switch, and I'm just pulling, and wham, my plier slipped off and hit me right in the chin. And so I'm going in, I'm looking in the mirror, I'm thinking, man, I need stitches, but we've been to the hospital for every week for the last couple of weeks. I'm not going to the hospital. And so being typical guy, I just made myself a little butterfly bandage and tried to glue it all together. Now, had I known about super glue back then, I would have fixed it, because I super glue cuts now all the time, but I didn't know about super glue back then, or I wouldn't have had that scar. It doesn't matter what I do, I'm going to be reminded of my dumb story with my pliers and the fifth wheel trailer. It's some things you aren't going to forget, y'all. And so I want to remind you of, okay, I don't want to, boy, there's some things that come to mind in life that I know some of you have had to deal with. I hate to say it to you, but the tough circumstances you've dealt with, you're never going to forget it. And so to say, just forget it. That's kind of a tough thing to do at times. Yet on the other hand, how many times do we over worry over something that we really aren't going to change, that aren't really going to help us. It's not going to matter a bit. The milk's already gone down the drain. The jar's already been shattered. Yes, we maybe could have done some prevention to keep it from happening, but what's done is done. Was it 2 or 3 weeks ago? It is what it is. And so it's done. The little quote says, don't cross your bridges until you come to them. And so that's worrying about the future. Don't cry over the spilt milk, of course, is worrying about the past. And so once again, he was in class. Dale Carnegie was in class, and he said, the teacher asked us, how many of you ever sawed wood? Well, if I were to ask that, how many of you ever sawed wood? So now most of us have sawed wood. And Blake raised his cast up in the air. One thing about it, I have a few scars on me, but I told Blake the other day, he is the fundamentalist Evel Knievel. Blake has broken so many bones on his body. So how many of you have sawed wood? Blake raised the cast into the air, and so yeah, we've all sawed wood. Well, how many of you ever sawed sawdust? We can't saw sawdust, and kind of a silly illustration. But why can't you saw sawdust? Because it's already been sawed or sawn. Okay, I don't know what's proper grammar with that. It's already been done. It's already been done. So what good is it going to do us to try to go back and continue to do something and to live in a time and fret over things that have already been done? One thing I've enjoyed is in reading this book is filling in the blanks of illustrations that happened in the 20s and 30s. Dale Carnegie said he was having Thanksgiving dinner with Jack Dempsey. Yeah, any of y'all know who Jack Dempsey is? Some of you may, and a boxer. And so he said he was eating Thanksgiving dinner with Jack Dempsey 10 years after he lost his heavyweight title fight to Gene Tunney. And I've heard of Dempsey, but I'm not so sure that I'd really heard of Gene Tunney. And so Dale Carnegie and Jack Dempsey are having Thanksgiving dinner together, families, I guess, maybe together. And Jack Dempsey started telling Dale Carnegie about his feelings and the things that he was going through after he lost his title fight to Gene Tunney. And so their first fight, both fights were in 1927. And he said, and the first fight was, neither one of them were a knockout, but they were both by decision, and Tunney won both of them. What's interesting is in this fight, because this is where I'm saying I have fun filling in the blanks. So I got on the computer and Jack Dempsey and Dempsey Tunney fight. And so it comes up 1927, and one of the first things, some of you that are historians of it, the longest count. And so that's one of the little phrases on the longest count. And so I said, okay, what is this all about? And so I looked at it. It's kind of interesting. I wanted to tell you this story just because it adds almost insult to injury. So Dempsey's trying to get his title back. It's their second fight. And Dempsey knocks Tunney down. And it's only a 10-round fight. Dempsey knocks Tunney down. I think it was in the 6th or 7th round. I didn't write it down. He knocks him down, getting ready to get his title back. But they had just come up with a new rule in boxing, and that is that when your opponent is knocked down, you have to go to a neutral corner before the ref begins to count. But I started looking at fights. You know how YouTube is. You know, you'll be watching this, and then another one will show up to where maybe you'll like this one too. And so I've watched a couple boxing matches where the worst beating in boxing, and you know, that one was with Dempsey and fighting a guy that was 10 times bigger. They called it the Samson or Samson and Goliath, David and Goliath, and Dempsey was a whole lot shorter than this guy, and this guy was huge, and Dempsey caught this guy and knocked him down in the first round, and I'm going to say the guy probably fell down 20 times in this fight. It only went a couple of rounds, and I'm saying, why aren't they calling this fight? This is crazy. But anyway, these new rules. So the longest count, and it used to be, these boxers, when some of these old fights I'd watch, and he'd be beaten away, and so the ref was right there, and he's counting. Well, the other boxer's standing right behind the ref. He is ready. And as soon as the ref lets the guy up, and that boxer's pounding on him again. And so, but those rules have changed, and the refs grab their gloves and talk to him and do all of that kind of stuff now for set. Not then. They just beat the fire out of each other, and that guy's standing there waiting. Well, Dempsey, because it's a new rule, so he knocks Tunney down, and he's standing behind the ref. Well, the ref was aware enough of the new rule that he kept telling Dempsey. He kept motioning for him. You have to go to your neutral corner before he starts counting. So Dempsey went to the wrong corner, and the ref is telling him, you got to go to your neutral corner. So Dempsey finally gets to his neutral corner. The ref goes back over to Tunney, and he begins his count. So it became the longest, what they referred to as the longest count. Had Dempsey gone to his corner and remembered the new rule, he would have regained his championship, because Tunney was still out of it at 9 seconds. But it took 7 seconds, 7 I think to 8 seconds before Dempsey got to a neutral corner and went back. So Tunney had almost 18 to 19 seconds to get back up, which he did, and ended up winning the fight. Wow. So once again, the what ifs, the regrets, had I remembered the rules, all of those things. Okay, I had to tell you that story. Aren't you glad you heard that story? The guys are saying yes. The girls are saying, why did he have to take my time to tell me that story? And so, but they're having Thanksgiving dinner, and Dempsey tells Carnegie that he said, I realized in the middle of the fight that I'd become an old man. And he said, I was still on my feet at the end of each round, but he said that was about it. He said my face was all puffed up, and my face was cut. His eyes were just about closed shut. And he said, I remember when we're standing in the ring, and I watched as they raised Tunney's hands again and said that he beat me as the winner for the second time. He said, I realized at that point in my life that my fighting career was over forever. And he said, so now I'm dealing with that. And he said, and I'm going back through the crowd, and he said, people are reaching out and wanting to grab my hand and slap my hand, and some wanted to congratulate me and just to show their appreciation. He said, I looked and I saw others with tears running down their cheeks because they just knew that the champion I was no longer going to be the champion. And he said, I just knew it. He said, I knew I was done. I was finished. He said, it was hard. This is a statement that he made. It was hard to keep from worrying about it all, but I said to myself, I'm not going to live in the past or cry over spilt milk. I'm going to take this blow on the chin and not let it floor me. And so he just decided, he said, you know what? I'm not going to let this get the best of me, but I'm going to become active. And so he started acting. And no pun intended to be active, but he started acting. I guess he was married to an actress, and so he had some roles, got some roles with her in acting. He opened up, I guess, a very famous restaurant, and he began to do boxing exhibitions. And he told Carnegie, he said, as they were having Thanksgiving dinner with each other, he said, the truth is I've had a better time during the last 10 years of my life than I had when I was a champion. Now, lesson to be learned for all of us. We take a blow in our life, which living life, that is going to happen. We are going to have the setbacks. We're going to have the dummy moments. We're going to have the things because of our human nature that we shouldn't have done, that we wish would have done differently. And it knocked us down, took the wind out of us, almost like I preached the other night. And we fret, we worry, and we cry over the spilt milk, and we try to resaw sawdust. And now again, fine line. That scar is not going away. That scar is not going away. And as much as we try to forget it, there's some things we're just going to have to try to deal with. And so here's some lessons. I'm going to give you some quick lessons from all of this that I think we can learn. Number one, we need to do all we can to keep from spilling the milk. We need to do all we can to keep from spilling the milk. We can't just live life in a half-hearted, I don't care such a way. I don't know how many times we dealt with couples through the years and their marriage is on the brink of ending, and way too many have ended. And boy, I've said, not a fellow from our church, but in the last year, I've said to somebody that called me and wanted some help, and I said to him, I said, I hate to tell you this, but outside of a miracle of God, I don't see your marriage making it. I said, the only hope you have right now is to pray that God will intervene and put this thing back together. Well, I know I did it to her, he said to me, and I said, wow. Well, I hate to say it, but that individual fits this category right now. You should have thought about that a long time ago, and you should have done everything you could have done to keep from spilling the milk to begin with. And so we can't be dummies. We can't be silly. We have to learn our lessons and keep from spilling the milk. And we have to analyze our mistakes and learn some lessons from our mistakes so that we can keep from making some more of those dumb mistakes. Second of all, once you spilled the milk, we have to do our best to forget it. We can't saw sawdust. So there's some things you have to just make up your mind. You're going to press toward a mark, and you're going to try to move forward. So once we've spilled the milk, I don't know, maybe we just need to be reminded of the illustration. Go over and looking in the drain. Look, that milk's already gone down the drain. You aren't getting it back. You aren't getting it back. And so once we've spilled the milk, we have to forget it the best we can. And number three, we need to remember and accept God's grace. That's why I chose 1 Corinthians 15. Paul says, I'm not even meet to be called an apostle because I persecuted the church of God, but by the grace of God, I am what I am. You see, Paul knew what it was to do some really dumb things in his life, but have the grace of God applied to his life. Where sin abounded, grace did much more abound and exceedingly abounded. And so we need to remember that we do have, as a Christian, the advantage of the grace of God in our lives. I mean, how wonderful is it to see how God has taken so many through the years, messed up lives, and by His grace has taken a messed up life and has begun to rebuild somebody and to restore somebody and to help somebody be a wonderful Christian and to help other Christians. And so we need to remember, and I added in there, we need to remember and accept God's grace. And so Paul remembered, I persecuted Christians, but by the grace of God, and by God's grace, we can all be what we need to be for the Lord. So we need to do all we can to keep from spilling the milk. Once you spill the milk, we have to work on forgetting it. And third of all, we need to remember and accept God's grace. And then fourth of all, we need to keep moving forward as we press toward, and I worded it in this way, we need to keep moving forward as we press toward a new mark. A new mark. Jack Dempsey said, I guess I'll start a restaurant. I can't fight anymore. I guess I'll do some acting. I can't fight anymore. and I guess I'll do some boxing exhibitions. And it became a promoter for boxing. And I'll do all I can to help the sport because I can't really box anymore. And so I'm going to do all I can to help others that are around me. And so maybe it would be good if you've maybe fallen short in some area to look at a new mark and get some new goals. And boy, Wendy and I, we've been saying to each other, honey, I said, well, you and I are getting to the point we shouldn't even go outside our house without somebody holding our hand. I said, this is getting ridiculous. And so I mean, I'm not ready to get old yet. But I'm stiff in areas, and you know that you just can't do everything. It's just like you live stiff, you live sore. And Wendy said, "You think I'm going to live stiff?" And I said, "Yeah, probably." And I'm a good comforter, right? And yeah, probably. You think that? Yeah, probably. And so. Yeah, just some things. You know, it's been, I can't remember when was the last time I played volleyball, but it was with all of you. And I remember it was at the Huntertown Pavilion there, and we were playing volleyball, and Hannah and Autumn, they used to always, all of us as a family, you know, we knew how each other played, and we played a lot of volleyball when we were in West Virginia, and we had a gymnasium. We played the set and spike volleyball, and I'd go in the gym because it was there just right across the street, and I'd shoot baskets, and I would spike the volleyball. You know, I wasn't real tall and never really could jump real high necessarily, but I learned how to spike the volleyball. And boy, the girls even, we need to get by, and I'd even place them if we're gonna, okay, you got to be ahead of me. And we didn't know anything about all this rotation and all that kind of stuff. We just played, you know, church volleyball. And boy, I remember that day. Hannah, I think, was on my team, and oh, Hannah, you need to be in front of me because I'm right-handed, and then you can set hands on. You know, send the ball to Hannah. You know, set me up. You know, yeah. And so we got out there playing, and I knew I was to the point that I was slipping a little bit. Wasn't as strong as I used to be. So yeah. So the ball comes on the side, goes to Hannah. She sets me up. Everything is great. I take my few steps and I come around. I'm going to knock somebody off their feet on the other side. And I come around and I swing and I miss the ball totally, and the ball hit me right in top of the head. Everybody laughed, and why wouldn't they? I mean, that's pretty funny, actually. And so I laughed with everybody, but I thought to myself, I think it was the year before then that I hurt myself playing softball. Yeah, so that was the year I was playing third base, and Alexis, you were running around, and the ball was still way out in the outfield. But I said, I'm going to mess with Alexis. So she's rounding second, and so I'm over there at third, and I'm ready, and so I'm acting like we're going to get her out. And so she gets real close, and I jumped up and hit my fist in my glove for it to pop, and I was going to act like I caught it and tagged her. You know, I was going to just make her totally confused. Well, the ball was still in the outfield. And so, but I jump up and I grab it. And when I came down on third base, I rolled my ankle. I had to be on crutches the next Sunday in church. And I mean, my ankle just, oh man, it was terrible. So I don't play volleyball and softball and all of that much anymore. Now, I'm telling you some long stories here, and I told you we need to quit. Maybe in our life, instead of fretting over what we can't do anymore and trying to saw sawdust, and maybe we can establish some new marks and say, I'm going to keep moving forward. Yeah, I've been knocked down a few times, made a few mistakes, and have a few scars, and can't run as fast as I used to, can't jump the way I used to. But I do know one thing. I know I still love the Lord, and I know that New Heights Baptist Church is a good church, and I know that we have a lot of good days ahead of us, and I know I can keep dreaming, and we can think of ways that we can continue to serve the Lord. And when it comes to things of just entertainment, and you know, I learned a long time ago, I'm not competition anymore. I wrote them up here. I'm not competition, I'm exhibition. That's what I am now when it comes to volleyball. volleyball, and I'm entertainment when it comes to playing all of that stuff. And you know what? Why not get to the point? I know now that I can't do some of those things like I used to when I was in my 30s and in my 40s. Hey, those of you that are in your 20s and 30s, enjoy it. Okay, enjoy it while you can and have fun with it and have a good time. But I got to think as I was preparing all of this, you know what? I can still golf. Brother Josh and Brother Jake, I can't beat you yet. I'm going to have to do a lot of learning to beat Jake. But I might still be able to beat Brother Joshua. But Brother Joshua is getting pretty good too, though. And so when they get a whole lot better than me, I quit golfing with them. But I haven't golfed very little. But I got to thinking, those of you that golf, I got to thinking about, you know what? It's according to how you look at life. Instead of feeling like I can still play volleyball. But when I play, I better play with a little bit different a mentality. No, I'm not going to knock somebody off their feet with spiking the volleyball. And if I can get to the ball, whoever chooses me, you better be thankful I just got to the ball to begin with. And so if you want to put me on your team under those conditions, we'll have fun, and I'll trash talk everybody, on the other side of the team, and we'll have a good time with that. And we might still win, but I guarantee there are going to be some moments you're going to have to try to decide, oh man, I want to laugh at the preacher right now, but I'm afraid to. But if I'm going to play, and however you look at life, maybe it'll help you a little bit more to look at life and say, I'm going to enjoy it. And so, all right, I got to quit it. Jack Dempsey said, I knew my career was over. And so instead of trying to keep sowing sawdust, crying over spilled milk, I got beat twice in the same year. I'm done. So I'm going to start doing some other things. I'm going to enjoy life. And who knows, you might even enjoy life more than you thought you would, because you established a new mark and you said, I'm going after it. I'm going after it. And so there are some new lessons for us to learn, and hopefully some new reminders. Do all you can to keep from spilling the milk. Once you spill the milk, forget it the best you can. Remember and accept God's grace, and then keep moving forward as you press toward a new mark. Paul said, I labored more abundantly. Why? Because I killed Christians, and I hate it that I killed Christians, and God saved me. And so now I am what I am by the grace of God, and I'm going to work as hard as I can because God has been so good to me. And that's the attitude we ought to have. All right, let's have a word of prayer.